So, good day everyone. Today we will continue our discussion for the second part of the revised corporation code, and we will discuss very important doctrines, and one of which is the doctrine of separate juridical personality. What about this doctrine? So basically, a corporation ay meron siyang personality separate and distinct from its stockholders and members, and it's not affected by the personal rights, obligations, and transactions of the latter. So it means to say lang na nang dahil sa separate personality na iyon, ang stockholders ng corporation is different from the corporation itself. So, if there would be cases that there are certain transactions that a president of a corporation would enter into, it should not make that president in his private capacity be liable. Kasi hiwalay po ang corporation at saka ang stockholders composing it. So, ano ba yung mga possible consequence of having a separate na personality? What are the consequences of the doctrine of legal entity or doctrine of separate juridical personality ng corporation and its stockholders? So, one is that ang stockholders po, hindi po sila magiging personally liable sa lahat ng mga debts ng corporation and vice versa. Ang mga stockholders are not liable for the corporate acts unless lang it is expressly provided by law. Another consequence of this doctrine is that ang stockholders po, hindi sila owners ng corporate properties and assets. Meron lang sila, kung tatawagin natin ay, meron lang silang inchoate right or expectancy sa assets ng corporation in case po ang corporation ay madedissolve and then magkakaroon ng return ng assets. So, another consequence of this doctrine or this principle under the revised corporation code is that ang mga stockholders, they cannot sell or maintain any action or cases in their own name in connection with the corporation affairs. Hindi sila po pwede, yung mga stockholders na yon, or regarding the business or property ng corporation. The same thing, the same vein na ang mga stockholders din, wala silang right to recover for any property. Sila na ang gagawa para sa corporation, kumbaga dun sa pagre-recover ng possession ng mga corporate property o di kayaman, sila na din yung gagawa, yung stockholders, to recover for damages sa mga injury to the properties belonging to the corporation or vice versa. Hindi yun po pwede. That's one of the consequences of this doctrine. Ang only exception lang is with relates to a derivative suit which we will be discussing on later part ng ating pong discussions. And then, aside from that, because of this doctrine, another consequence is that yung property belonging to the corporation, it cannot be attached to satisfy yun sa mga debt ni stockholders and vice versa. Although there are certain exception na pwedeng attach, pero inchoate lang din, And then the latter, because the stockholder is, ang kanyang interest lang ay indirect sa assets ng corporation. Indirect, it means to say, wala ka talagang, hindi ka matatawag na co-owner sa properties ng corporation. So, magkakaroon ka lang ng interest if in cases ng actual interest if the corporation will dissolve in the future. So, as a general rule, again, here, under this doctrine, as a general rule, due to the corporation's separate juridical personality, a stockholder may not be made to answer for acts or liabilities of the said corporation and vice versa. Base nga, dun po sa aking naging example, let's say for example nga, aring si president ng corporation enters into a contract in behalf of the corporation. Si president na yun, it cannot be made personally liable for the contracts he entered into, and then it's because of the doctrine that I have mentioned. So likewise as well, it is if in case man because of that contract ultimately yung mga empleyado ay na-dismiss, yung president hindi rin siya po pwedeng magiging personally liable if he had acted in good faith and he's act as an officer of the corporation. Yun naman ay relates to the personality of the corporation, which is a different person from the corporate officer acting on its behalf. But etong separate personality na ito, yung treatment, kumbaga, na siya ay isang artificial na tao, ay hindi to ikangay forever. Merong mga exception na pwede natin siyang, ang corporation, despite being a natural person having a separate personality, pwede natin siyang going liable in certain instances. So, there are certain exceptions that the corporation's separate juridical personality ay hindi po pwedeng i-invoke to escape for liability. Because there is this one case lang I just want to share is that merong nangyayari na it's very frowned upon kapag po ang mga empleyado ay magpo-form ng union. Ayaw nila nag-union ng mga empleyado. So, etong one transport company, ang ginawa niya ay former corporation ay nilipat niya yung mga empleyado niyang nag-organize ng union into another company which is a sole proprietorship. But nonetheless, yung running ng affairs ng sole proprietorship at saka nung corporation ay halos iisa lang. Isang nagmamanage, isang nagpapatakbo, isang nagpapasweldo. So comes here, ang mga empleyado ay hindi naka-receive ng wages. So, they claim for wages from this sole proprietorship na kanilang pinagtatrabuhan. Tapos, ang claim nila ay wala na kaming pambayad sa iyo wala na kaming pambayad na tawag nito. Wala na kaming pambayad for the wages. Di ang ginawa ng employees, nag-claim sila with the nag-claim sila with the other corporation, with the corporation. So, ang tanong dito ngayon, ang issue nito ngayon, pwede bang gawing liable yung corporation given the circumstances? So, according to the Supreme Court, yes. Kasi nga naman, pwede nating i-disregard na separate yung personality na yan, ni corporation na yan, with the other entity if it's used as a mere alter ego o di kaya if it is used to escape for liability or di kaya to commit fraud. So, eto na yung mga exceptions na sinasabi ko. So, the general rule is may separate personality si corporation pero that separate personality hindi niya pwede siyang i-disregard or it cannot be invoked just to escape for liability in certain instances when it is used for ends such as subversive to the policy and purpose which is intended by law. Ano itong mga situation na yon? One is, gusto nating would defeat public convenience o di kaya man would just want to justify wrong, protect a fraud just to defend a crime, o di kaya man to confuse legitimate na mga legal or judicial issues o di kaya ay it's because we wanted to make it as a vehicle para ma-evade natin yung ating mga existing obligations o di kaya to invoke for it's a way of circumventing the law or to deceive others or commit deception. So another exception is that ang corporate personality na separate juridical personality ay pwede ding hindi natin pwedeng i-invoke to escape liability if it is being used as a mere alter ego o di kaya man ay adjunct or business conduit for the sole benefit of the stockholders or another corporate entity. So the corporation basically is that. So, let us continue our discussion again for this part. So, nalaman na nga natin na ang ang corporation, hindi siya po pwedeng magiging generally liable for the acts or liabilities ng kanyang mga stockholders or members and vice versa. Kasi po, ang corporation nga ay meron siyang personality separate and distinct from its stockholders and members. Pero, however, nga, ang corporate existence na yung separate nga na personality may mga pagkakataon nga na po pwede mo siyang i-disregard under sa doctrine naman na piercing the veil of corporate fiction. Anong ibig sabihin nito? Na kung saan daw, yung kapag ang corporation ay na-form or ginagamit sa illegitimate na mga purpose o di kaya man ay gustong i-justify nga nung wrong as mentioned a while ago at di kaya ay gusto laang nating makatakas sa ating mga valid na mga legal obligation. Ang mangyayari ay yung corporation tsaka yung stockholder should be considered as one and the same. So, in relation to that, ito'y nagfo-fall nga base din sa ating discussion sa exception na kung saan hindi po pwedeng i-invoke yung separate juridical personality kapag ang purpose lang ay if it is to escape liability. So it falls on our exception. And in cases when the corporate entity is a mere alter ego, adjunct, or business conduit for the sole benefit of the stockholders or of another corporate entity. So, the corporation is merely a farce or hindi totoo. It is so organized and controlled and its affairs are so conducted as to make it merely an instrumentality, agency, conduit, or adjunct of another na So, next question is, ang mga stockholders ba ay entitled to the possession or ownership of the properties belonging to the corporation? Yun po yung ating tanong. But what should be the answer? Are they entitled? Ang ating po mga stockholders. So when it comes to property, yung corporate property which is owned by the corporation bilang juridical person and the stockholders therein have no claim on the corporate property as owner. So, the latter only have mere expectancy or inchoate right, kung tatawagin to the same upon dissolution of the corporation and after all the corporate creditors have been paid. So, ibig sabihin nito, nagkakaroon siya ng indirect interest lang sa corporation. Yun, matatanggap lang niya yung kanyang mga property rights in relation during sa process ng dissolution. Yan ay kapag meron pang left from what is being given to the creditors as in a form of payment of debts, diba? Kasi may preferential right nga sila. So ito yung nagfo-fall. Such right is limited only to their equity interest. So, ang tawag dito sa doctrine na to ay doctrine of limited na liability na nagsasabi meron lang siyang inchoate right or expectancy to the corporate property and upon the dissolution of the corporation after all the corporate creditors have been paid. So, therefore, mga properties na nakaregister in the name of the corporation are owned by the corporation as an entity. So, the same again, which is an entity separate and distinct from its stockholders or members. So, in cases that a share of stock for the part of the stockholders only typifies na meron siyang aliquot part dun sa corporation's property. Yung indirect interest nga sinasabi ko kanina. Or the right to have a share in its proceeds to that extent when distributed according to law and equity, but its holder, of course, is not the owner of any part of the capital of the corporation. Take note yung stockholder, hindi siya owner of any part of the capital of the corporation, nor that stockholder is entitled to the possession of any definite na portion ng property or assets ng corporation. Hindi pa nga siya matatawag nating co-owner ng corporate property. So, It's just, the stock just represents na proportionate niya na share sa interest niya sa property ng corporation, pero hindi siya nag-vest, ang stocks ay hindi nag-vest, the owner thereof, ng any legal right nga or title to any property of the corporation. So, ang kanya lang interest sa property ay beneficial in nature. So, because all those property, again, are owned by the corporation. So, that talks about the property right. Pero may mga pagkakataon na to tell you na ang stockholders' interest in the corporation, let's say, meron siya mga shares of stocks, being a stockholder, of course, you have shares. So, pwede siyang i-attach by his personal creditor kung meron siyang private, in his private capacity, But, the corporate property, hindi siya po pwedeng pang-satisfy ng kanyang mga personal na liabilities. The corporations, in relation to this, the corporation is entitled as well to due process, at the same time, equal protection against illegal searches and seizures, of course, subject to the police power din siya, to the state, insofar as the properties ng corporation is concerned. Entitled din siya against unreasonable searches and seizures. Hindi po pwedeng basta na lang papasukin ang kumpanya kung wala namang valid search warrant. However, ang corporation, hindi siya entitled ng privilege against self-incrimination. So, we'll be discussing that one thoroughly. And the next concept is the issue on kung ang corporation ba ay could be made liable for torts. Ano ba yung, and even crimes, ano ba yung mga torts or crimes? Basically, ang torts or crimes, ito yung mga acts or omissions that causes damage to another with fault or negligence na wala namang pre-existing contractual obligations. So, yun po basically daw, ang corporation civilly liable sa in the same manner as a natural person kasi we treat it as a person itself. Kasi generally speaking, yung rules regarding our liability regarding a principal for a tort committed ng isang agent ay the same whether yung principal na yon is a natural person or a corporation. Yun yung sabi ng batas. So, and whether also that agent be a natural person or corporation. So, lahat nag-agree na ang principal is liable for every tort na which he expressly na dinidirect or ini-authorize. And that is true for corporation as a natural na person. So, ganon. And then, yun na nga, being an entity with a separate juridical personality, ang corporation ay liable for torts committed by its officers under the express direction from the stockholders or directors acting as a body. Pero when it comes to crime naman, ang corporation, hindi siya po pwedeng arestuhin. Cannot be arrested or imprisoned. Bakit? Kasi wala naman talaga siyang, it's by legal fiction, wala siyang physical na existence. Although my place of business, but it's for purposes of serving subpoenas and summons and all correspondences relating to the corporation. Tapos, the corporation, it cannot be penalized for any crime punishable by imprisonment by reason of that nga, wala nga siyang physical existence. However, ang corporation po pwede siyang i-charge at pwede din siyang i-prosecute for a crime kapag ang penalty po ay fine lamang. So, take note of that po pwede siyang i-charge kapag ang penalty ay fine lamang. So, again, Since a corporation as a person is a mere legal fiction, it cannot be proceeded against criminally because it cannot commit a crime in which personal violence o di kaya ay ang malicious intent or criminal intent ay required. Criminal action is limited lang to the corporate agents guilty of an act amounting to crime and never against the corporation itself. Question now. Does a corporation have the same right as a natural person katulad natin, such as the right to recover for moral damages? So, the very categorical na answer to that is a no, because nga alam natin na ang corporation is an artificial being. So, hindi siya talaga mako-consider natin na at par with a natural person. Meron lang siya mga powers, attributes, properties expressly provided by law or incident to its existence. Pero ang corporation, being an artificial person, wala siyang mga feelings, mga emotions, o di kaya senses. Na yun yung, di ba, yun yung kino-consider in the award of moral damages. Para hindi na it's a sort of di siya tutuladan ng iba, kaya natin yan ina-award. So, basically, hindi siya makaka-experience ng physical sufferings, mental anguish, o di kaya, ito yung mga grounds kasi nga for the claim of, or the award of moral damages. Tsaka isa pa, yun na nga po, pero pwede si corporation makaklaim ng damages kapag nabibesmirch yung kanyang reputation. Nabahira, napasama yung kanyang magandang reputasyon. Pwede siyang doon. Pwede siyang, di ba, meron tayong tinatawag sa ating accounting na goodwill. May price na yun, may value na yun. So, pag yun ay nabahiran, pwede yun. Kapag, tawag nito, humingi ng damages. So, another point which is equally important is the concept ng doctrine of piercing the veil of corporate fiction. So, it has been previously touched, hindi to kapitbahay lang to ni doctrine of separate legal entity. Di ba na-mention natin na si corporation ay nakamask nga na siya ay merong separate na personality, naka-veil, may nakataklob sa kanya na ito'y tao, ito'y natural person to na artificial person to na created by contemplation of law. So, yung veil na yan, pwede nating tanggalin. So, ang tawag dito ay, sa doctrine na ito, mga instances na kung saan ay pwede nating tanggalin ng mask na yon is under the doctrine of piercing the veil of corporate na fiction. Piercing the veil of corporate fiction. Under this doctrine, a corporation will be looked upon as a legal entity as a general rule. But when the notion of legal entity ay ginamit naman niya para to defeat public convenience, justify a wrong, protect a fraud, o di kaya defend a crime, ang law ay i-disregard niya yan. The law will regard the corporation merely as an association of persons. So, yun po, titingnan natin yan napakaganda ng doctrine na ito. Kasi po, if we have to pierce, at tatanggalin natin ngayong maskara ng corporate fiction na yan, meron pong magiging effect. Ano yung mga iyon? Ano yung effect of piercing the veil of the corporate fiction? So, the corporation, ang mangyayari ay, will just be considered as a mere associations of persons. Thus, yung mangyayari ay, yung liability will directly attach na to the stockholders or to the officers of the corporation. So, dahil nga association, ang treatment na nga sa kanya ay association na lang ng tawag nito, persons. So, tatandaan din natin ha, ang piercing the veil ng corporate entity, ito isang equitable, ika nga ay pang fair na remedy or pang attain ng justice na remedy. This is being developed just to address situations na kung saan yung separate corporate personality ng corporation ay naaabuso o di kaya man ay it is being used for several wrongful reasons. So, if in cases when the veil of corporate fiction is being pierced, another effect would be so yun na nga, magiging liable na yung persons directly responsible for certain actions. And then take note ha, when it comes to the piercing ng veil ng corporate fiction, the court, just to remind as well, na dapat ito'y ginagamit kapag the moment that we would really take off the masks ng isang corporate, the corporation as a separate entity, dapat lang din ay we should exercise nga ng caution, 'di ba? Or extra care kapag tatanggalin natin yung juridical personality ng isang corporation, pag i-disregard natin, dapat lang na ang wrongdoing should be clearly and convincingly established and should not just a matter of presumption. So, hindi lang siya produkto ng presumption. Dapat may concrete and clear and convincing na mga evidence to prove that there is really